Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to all of you here in the audience in Dubai, and of course, our audiences joining us from around the world via our live stream. I'm Pavni Mittal. I will be your moderator for today. Before we begin, may I please request all of you here to mute your mobile phones. Now, as we know, 2023 has been the hottest year on record. It is critical that we decarbonize transport, and one way to do that is to electrify it. Now, this is not an easy endeavor, as we all know, and I can see a lot of people smiling here in the audience. It requires a lot of investment, infrastructure, public-private partnerships, political will, regulatory framework, and so on. Today's session is going to focus on that topic. We're going to look at solutions. We'll have examples from public sector and private sector of how companies and public organizations are electrifying public transport, all the while creating larger economic and social good for society by making transport greener and more inclusive. Now, one organization that has been leading this is the World Bank. It is working with about 30 odd organizations in many countries to help electrify their transport by helping them build infrastructure, raising funds, and scaling their fleet. To discuss this and more, may I please welcome World Bank's Vice President of Infrastructure, Guangzha Chen.
Thank you, Prani. Good morning or good afternoon to those connected online. Esteemed colleagues, thank you very much for joining us for this discussion today. The road towards a more livable planet must include sustainable and zero-emission transport. I think transport sector already contributed nearly a quarter of the global emissions, causing mounting risk to both our climate and the people's health. We must decarbonize the transport sector immediately. If anything, compared with the energy sector, I think energy sector, we are already seeing trend of much uptake on renewable energies, but in transport sector, the trend is really alarming because at the moment, it's not going the right direction. That's why we need to act fast and act quickly. Comprehensive transport system that incorporate electric vehicles can achieve climate and development goals at the same time. These include improving quality of public transportation and shared mobilities, providing last-mile connectivity, reducing dependence on greenhouse gas emitting the import fuel, and providing new opportunity to participate in transport services and mobility services models. I'm very proud to say that the World Bank Group, working collectively with our colleagues in IFC and MEGA, have served an active role in the e-mobility transition, beginning focusing obviously on developing countries. This is an area that IBRD, IDA, IFC, MEGA have all aligned from the start to support our client countries in countries like Senegal, Chile, India, and many others for the public and private sector around the common vision of decarbonizing transport. Since 2016, the World Bank has supported over 30 projects in over 32 countries in the effort to improve scalability and bankability of e-mobility solutions in many operations. Our approach has combined investment in infrastructure with technical assistance while leveraging participation of private sector in both operation and financing. IFC, the private sector arm of the World Bank Group, has invested over $2.8 billion in e-mobility over the last 5 years, and we'll hear that from my colleagues, Jamie, in a minute. The World Bank also supports countries through our vigorous analytical work, effort in this fund, including preparation of good practice note toolkits to inform governments, municipalities, operators in terms of how to design and implement electric mobilities. We also bring together countries working in this field, both developed and developing countries, together and learn from each other. One of the programs, what we call is the Leadership in Urban Transport. We work with the government of Korea over the last couple of years. And I'm really pleased to learn that recently during my visit to Amman, where they launched their BRT system last year, which actually was not funded by the World Bank. But the general manager was telling me that he actually learned a lot from that urban leadership programs in operating a BRT systems. We're also helping governments and international community to build an economic case for e-mobilities by analyzing the benefit and cost of e-mobility for individual countries. So far, in a sample of some 20 low and low middle income countries, we have a positive story. Over 80% of this country we assessed, e-buses is actually economically viable. Also with e-two-wheelers and three-wheelers. And these countries has a very strong case for electric mobilities. We have many esteemed colleagues that are joining us today that will talk about and share their experience on e-mobilities. But I do want to highlight one of those, which I think my colleague from Dhaka is going to explain more detail. This is the BRT system in Dhaka, which is just about to launch. I think, again, Tierney is going to explain more. But this is a great example that I'm very proud of the fact that on a number of fronts. One is a BRT system, first BRT system in Africa region that is entirely on e-buses. And secondly, this is also a program that the World Bank Group worked together from the World Bank, IFC, and mobilizing private financing. And of course, we talk about the benefits about number of people that are benefiting the system, the job that can help facilitate, and all that, again, we can hear from our colleagues. This is a type of project that we really want to do more and scale it up across different parts of the world. But we also know that advancing e-mobility is also a big challenge, particularly in terms of financings. Electric mobility requires high upfront capital investment compared with the gas power counterpart. But we also know that e-vehicles are put into high use with more daily kilometer travel and more people transport per trip. They could have a lower total cost of ownership than traditional internal combustion engine vehicles. And that's the case that we need to make throughout the world, particularly in low and low middle income countries. For our part at the World Bank, we are leveraging the Global Facility to Decarbonizing Transport established in 2021 to generate a pipeline of zero-emission vehicle programs to fund pilot projects, research, and capacity building for climate-smart mobility program in the European countries. Since the COP26 in Glasgow, where the GFTD was established under the UK presidency, half of the GFTD's approved grants has been focused exclusively on e-mobilities. Driven by rising interest and demand from our clients, the World Bank anticipates that our e-mobility engagement, both in lending and knowledge partnership, and both in terms of public financing and private financing, will substantially increase in the coming years. And we are committed to supporting our countries in the effort to build a sustainable transport system that works for everyone, but also leverage mostly on e-mobility moving forward. So with that, I really want to thank you for your participation, but also take this opportunity for those connecting online that we really would invite more partners to join us in the Global Facility to Decarbonizing Transport. And if I may, just 30 seconds, I want to add one more point, is that in all the transition we talk about, we always talk about just transition. I think on the e-mobility transition, there's also a case about just transition. Here, I'm talking about which countries, more advanced countries, obviously they will move faster than low-income countries in moving to transitional e-mobility. The question is, what happened to your used vehicles? At the moment, much of that, as you know very well, are exported to low-income countries. So that is something that will require a really self-disciplined regulatory framework, particularly in European Commission, which I appeal in ITF conference, that they need to really impose that a strong emission standard, safety standard before such a used vehicle are exported to low-income countries. I think this is important because there's an asymmetric of influence here. Low-income countries sometimes don't have the strong regulatory framework to screening of the import of these kind of used vehicles, which are typically high emissions and lower standards. And that's something we all need to work together. With that, I want to thank you again for your participation, and I'm going to now pass on to my colleague, Jamie Ferguson, who is the Global Director of Climate Business in IFC. Climate business is everything, I guess. Jamie, over to you.
Thank you to my friend Guang and colleague. I'm going to say very few words because I want to get over to Pavni and our panelist to listen and learn. Take a step back. Why are we all here? Somewhere in a dark room back there, there's a lot of people getting no sleep negotiating the global response to climate change. And there will only be a negotiated outcome. There will only be rapid global action if it's a just one. And that means inclusive growth. It means low carbon growth. It means resilient growth in emerging markets. And transport is at the heart of that. For the last 100 years, right at the heart of human economic growth has been transport. It's enabled so many parts of our modern society, and it's been driven by fossil fuels. And that can no longer be the case. So we have to transition it, and we have to transition it fast. And that's where the bank group collectively is trying to put our shoulders to the wheel, forgive the pun, of really trying to accelerate that with our public sector arm, with our private sector arm, and with our risk arm. And we're doing that because, as Guang said, finance is at the heart of this. EVs make sense when you get the financing model right. And so we want to be here to support that transition on the public and private sector side. And with my private sector hat on, seize the opportunity that exists here. This is a massive opportunity for impactful investment, which, as Guang says, is going to not only create jobs, but it's also going to create accessible, safe, the sort of knock-on benefits of accessibility, of gender benefits, of formalizing sector, the transport sector, are massive. So for IFC's part, we are looking at this transition in a holistic way. We have a EV investment strategy that thinks across the entire value chain, from the mining of the minerals needed for the batteries, through to the manufacturing, through to the leasing, through to the asset and service co approaches, through to financial intermediaries as well. And we're trying to engage across that chain to accelerate it. In the last 5 years, we've invested 2.8 billion. We hope that will increase significantly. Our pipeline is already at the 5 billion mark, so we see this as an area of growth investment. Some examples include, just in the last year, 180 million green sustainability-linked loan package to Alchem for the Sal de Vida greenfield lithium mining operation in Argentina. And just last month, 127 million loan for our own account, but just shy of 350 million financing package in total to, and I'm going to butcher this name here, guys, I'm sorry, but the Suministradora de Bus que Cuatro in Chile, which is the largest e-mobility public transportation fleet outside of China. So, again, just to close and pass on to Pavni and the panel, you know, the opportunity here is huge. We would like to be the partner to get the financing piece of this right, to get that total cost of ownership competitive, and to move these markets across Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And thank you for your partnership.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you for highlighting the fact that there are opportunities, because we know about the challenges and we will discuss those. But as I said, this is a solutions-focused discussion and we really want to get into that. Now, we spoke about financing, but one thing that I thought was very interesting in both your speeches was also about the importance of the larger good that e-mobility does. And today's panel, we're going to talk about electrification of public transport, but also in the context of how it can achieve inclusivity in some of the most unequal, but also poorest parts of the world, low and middle income countries. And I want to now introduce our wonderful set of speakers here. In Latin America, Bogota is one city that has been deploying electric buses while also reducing emissions. Representing the Ministry of Tourism, we have Marta Caldas. Thank you for being here. You heard from Guang earlier about the BRT system that is set to open in a few days, if I'm not wrong, in Dakar. So we have with us Thierno Au. He is the Director General for Executive Council of Urban Transport in Senegal. Thank you for being here. And to talk about public finance, remember, Brazilian Development Bank is a key player in promoting e-mobility in Brazil. So to talk to us about those endeavors, we have the Director for Infrastructure, Energy Transition, and Climate Change, Luciana Costa. Thank you so much for being here. Martha, I want to begin with you. Bogota's had e-buses for a while now. Can you talk to us about what's working well, and what advice would you have for other cities that might want to start scaling their fleet?
Okay, thank you. First of all, let me express my gratitude for this invitation. Regarding to Bogota, it is most important we have 8 million inhabitants, and we have in our transport system 11,000 buses under the operation. Transmilenio could start its pathway of electrification of its fleet using new business model and new players with a clear risk allocation where the participation of the private sector was relevant. This disruptive change of the business model solidifies public transport operation, reduces the long-term its costs, and allows of upgrading the service offered with the separation of the ownership and the operators. This new model responds to bankability, flexibility, better quality for user, and efficiency. Bankability responds to the current financial context of the public transportation sector because the financial institutions does not give credit to the traditional operators. Flexibility ensures fleet availability in the system regardless to the continuity of a specific operator. Better quality for the passengers. Generates better incentives in contracts to provide a quality service to the users. Efficiency does not generate a higher cost for the user. The passengers pay the same fare.
Okay, thank you. That's really great to hear from someone who has experience in running public transport. Now I want to speak to Thierno. So are you nervous? Are you excited? Okay, that's good to know. So why the BRT? I mean, what problem are you trying to solve in Dakar?
Oh, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer and the World Bank Group, which is such long-standing partner and the main sponsor of the BRT project we're running now in Dakar. Before answering your question, a few points of context.
Of course.
Dakar conurbation is developing rapidly, concentrating almost a quarter of the national population in the small proportion of the territory, less than 1%. According to demographic projection, we know that this population currently 4 million will reach to 7 million in 2040, with motorized travel expected to double by then. While motorized travel accounts for only 30% of the modal share, 5% only use car and 25% public transportation. We know also that the negative externalities have a very high cost. We evaluate that it is estimated at $1 billion dollars a year. This represents 6% of the national GDP. In line with its international commitments on climate change, the government of Senegal has opted for a paradigm shift, giving priority now to clean collective mobility systems. And we work with the World Bank, the European Investment Bank to illustrate that with our BRT project, the pilot one, full electric, and this BRT will be powered by solar energy. This is the first world showcase. The BRT pilot line is designed to carry up 300,000 passengers a day on 18 kilometers route, serving the most densely populated and congested area in Dakar, while having journey times. We are specifically addressing 12 SDGs, and the social, economic, and environmental impact is considerable. For example, free achieving goals. The proportion of the population with access to the city center in less than 1 hour will be increased to 12%. It is very important, and will generate with this project 1,000 direct jobs, which a target of at least 35% for women. And we take in account, as you see, gender equality. And the last but not least, we have a reduction of CO2 emission of around 59,000 tons per year. This is very important for health for people, but health for our environment too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So SDGs, jobs for women, economic development. Luciana, I want to talk to you a bit about, could you first put into context what Brazil is doing? Because one of the big headlines at COP has been, the president was here and he has made a lot of efforts in promoting Brazil as one of the leaders from the developing world when it comes to combating climate change. So please put into context where e-mobility fits into all of this and the role your bank wants to play or is playing in promoting this.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to thank the World Bank, Nicholas, for the invitation, Mr. Guan. Thank you very much for being here. It's a pleasure. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for listening to us, my colleagues from the panel. Brazil has challenges, and we think that the country has a lot of opportunities in this climate change and this path to net zero. First, Brazil is very different from the rest of the world in terms of greenhouse gas emission. 75% of our greenhouse gas emissions comes from deforestation and land use, and just 17% for energy, and transport it's included, because 80% of our light vehicle fleets runs in biofuels. In our gasoline, 30% is biofuels. So electrification, and Brazil, it's a country of continental size. We have 21 urban areas with more than 1 million inhabitants. And when it comes to e-mobility, I would like to separate light vehicles from trucks and buses, because on the Brazil, and since our power matrix is 88% renewable, and last year, because the reservoirs were full, we didn't dispatch gas, so our power matrix was 92% renewable. Among the G20, Brazil has reached Paris Agreement in the power sector already. We are done.
That's a round of applause.
So, but the big challenge, and it's not the matter of this panel, is deforestation. Since from January to October, President Lula managed to reduce the deforestation rate in 49%. So this year it's a big achievement, but there is huge challenge ahead. I'm glad to talk about this if you want. And deforestation is related to crime, not to GDP, so it's much more on climate, fighting crime. Land use, it's another problem. But what about electrification? In Brazil, we do believe in all routes of decarbonization. We believe in biofuels, we believe in electrification, we believe in green hydrogen, we believe in biomethane and biogas, biomass. So we think that in order for the world to achieve what we are trying to achieve, and I would like to emphasize that we all know it's difficult to reach 1.5, but I think that collectively we must agree that we have to stick to that. Let's not give up. And so buses. Brazil, in Latin America, Brazil produces 52% of all diesel buses running in Latin America because we have an industry of buses. We export buses to all countries in Latin America, and now what we are doing, we are trying to prepare the industry to produce electric buses, and BNDES will finance these electric buses. We have started with a $500 million facility for the city of São Paulo to electrify 1,300 buses, but that's just the beginning, because in Brazil we have 107,000 buses. So Brazil, it's one of the countries which has bus strip in the world. So, I mean, bus is really important for Brazil. And it's a huge challenge and a huge opportunity, I fully agree. Opportunity because we have to bear in mind that for the health of the population in the urban areas, it's crucial to have electric buses. We know that there is no, I agree that we need to find the right financial model because it's CapEx intense, but when it comes to OpEx, maintenance and fuel, and the projects are viable already, at least in Brazil, even with high cost of capital, because it's another big challenge of the country. So what we are doing, and we think there is no one, since Brazil is too big and the cities are very different, we think that there is no one model fits all. We will have one model for São Paulo or one model for different operators in São Paulo. Just in São Paulo, we have 14,000 buses to electrify. So we have models for mid-sized cities, we have models for poor cities. World Bank, IDB, they are all good partners of BNDES because BNDES has a huge knowledge of the local market, and we don't have presence abroad. So we are very, I think that, you guys have what we don't have, and in Brazil, we can deliver knowledge on the sectors. We know nearly all the big projects comes to our desk because BNDES has financed more than 80% of all the power installed capacity in the country, 100% of the subways, more than 80% of the toll roads, 100% of the railway. It's the largest infrastructure.
I want to talk to you about financial solutions in a bit, but hold that thought because you said something that's very interesting and that I'd like to direct at Erno, which is about public-private partnerships and different models for different cities. You're going to start on a journey soon, figuratively and literally. From all the work that you've done, what do you think can be replicated in other cities? What someone in Colombia or someone in Brazil can learn from your experience already in Dakar?
So thank you for this question. And I visit Bogota and Bogota inspiring us for the solution we put in place in Dakar with the BRT we run now. I would like to start that with the total cost estimated of this project, $667 million, financed by the state of Senegal, the World Bank, and the European Investment Bank. For this project, we have a PPP structure for acquisition, operation, and maintenance of the electric rolling stock, enable the participation of the private sector. This is important, 31% of the total financement. This is an encouraging success for the development of carbon-free mobility. From the financial structuring of this project, I would like to highlight 4 important lessons that have made this project possible. The first one is to have a clear allotment strategy involving public transportation, public investment, to finance the design and construction of resilient infrastructure, while the acquisition, operating, and maintenance of the rolling stock was entrusted to the private sector. This is also important. This is my second point, to have a balanced risk sharing with a guaranteed minimum traffic. As you know, in urban context, this is very difficult to have profitability. So we put in place guaranteed for traffic level and a ceiling triggering revenue sharing with the private sector called CETUD, the local authority of transportation, have in charge maintenance of infrastructure. And the third point, from my point of view, is a tax system adapted to green technologies. So with tax exemption for balanced operation at socially acceptable fares, we support the public, the private sector, and also our users. The last one is to have a strong local content with the involvement of the national private sector. As you know, in African cities, we have lots of informal public transportation. So we use our sovereign fund to take the capital of organized operating companies in behalf of the local operators. This arrangement can be replicated in Senegal and other countries with similar contexts. And that's why with the 2035 Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, we will deploy an investment of $2.5 billion as part of a strategy that prioritizes collective and active mobility, green also, for a peaceful city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Martha, I want to talk to you. So what are the big challenges that your ministry faces when it comes to funding scale? When you're trying to increase the size of your fleet, get more buses, add more routes, how difficult is it to get funding and to get the project rolling?
Okay, thank you. We know that achieving this commitment of electromobility, it's necessary the participation of the public and the private sector, and multilateral bank, electric utilities, e-vehicles manufacturers, private capital funds, and among others. In this sense, we know that we need to think out the box. and development and implementation of new business model, for instance, the separation of the access, ownership, and operation, makes possible to include e-buses because upfront costs are high, are key. Each city has an specific technical and financial characteristics. Therefore, the business model and solution applied to each city are tailor-made. For example, the different models implemented by Bogotá on its pathway to electrification or its fleet had both lesson learning for future tenders. My advice to make the political decision to electrify transportation and look for the different financial and technological alternatives applied to each country.
Point, because that's something that I want to talk to you
Yes.
about, is how do you find the right model? Like, what kind of financial instruments are there? And when cities or private players want to go to banks like yours, what are the conversations they should be having?
Yes, first, I agree that it's a very good alternative to separate operations from assets. That's something that we haven't done in Brazil yet. We have been discussing with Nicholas and World Bank on how we help cities to move for this model. It's not easy because there are a lot of interests behind, and sometimes we cannot convince the actors in the scene. But I think this is a good model. BNDES can contribute either with debt or equity. If we are to create a leasing company, BNDES could be one of the shareholders, for instance. So we have been having discussions on that. And we have four companies producing electric buses in Brazil. Few countries in the world can produce electric buses, and we can, because we had the tradition to produce diesel buses. So, and now we are producing electric buses, our buses. But in order for BNDES to finance the electrification of buses fleet, buses should be built in Brazil. Of course, international players, Mercedes, BYD, they are producing in Brazil, and BNDES are financing their buses. So we think that the electrification, it's a path of a reset of the industry, of the green industrialization of the country. So that's one thing that we are trying to do. And in Brazil, we also produce lithium batteries. WEG produces batteries. So we are trying, I agree that we have to take the opportunity to reindustrialize the country with the electrification. So we are looking at that also.
So what are the big mistakes that government organizations or private players make when they come to banks like yours for funding?
Mistake? I mean, it's so early that, I mean, we don't have the experience of Bogotá because we are not ahead in the learning curve. Brazil is I mean, they are more advanced than us in the electrification. We are running late and we are trying to catch up. But I mean, one thing is that sometimes majors or cities, they want to rush instead of structure the best project. I don't know if that's a mistake or if it's because there are interests behind, but sometimes it's more efficient to structure because it's capital intensive. It's more efficient to separate operations and assets, and sometimes they prefer to deploy capital without doing that. That's a mistake in my opinion. But we don't have a big learning curve yet. We are running late in the electrification. The first transaction that BNDES has done is this $500 million. Yeah. So, and that we just approved 1 month ago to electrify 1,300 buses in São Paulo. But we have more than 4,000 buses in our pipeline for the upcoming year. So I think we'll be there.
So maybe in a few years, you and I will be sitting here and we'll have more lessons. Speaking of lessons, they are now going to end with you. So any challenges that you're anticipating?
I think so that the financing of green mobility, by guaranteeing the financial probability of operation, represent the major challenge made by African cities. I would like to highlight two things. It is crucial to put in place with the development partners the appropriate financing solution in terms of guarantees and subsidies to increase the bankability of projects. We have to choose between high level of capex and climate change.
Yeah.
And in the middle, we have to take in account affordability for people we move. And the second one is for governments. To tackle climate emergency, it will be necessary to develop, to improve our regulatory framework for the decarbonization of transport, covering the entire value chain for a strong local impact.
Okay, great. Thank you. On that note, I'd like to thank you for all being here, for sharing your insights, and please take your seat in the audience. We will have a second panel coming up. Thank you. Well, we just heard about the critical need for low and middle income countries to transition and how some of the countries are doing that bit, whether it comes to strengthening public-private partnerships, getting financing from banks. A lot of hope, a lot of opportunity, a lot of potential. May I please invite our next panel to take their place now? We right now just looked at how cities are achieving this. We want to now focus on endeavors by private players and, of course, the role public financiers can play. So we will have conversations around public-private partnerships in the next panel as well. As far as private players are concerned, it's important to remember that a lot of the private players in this space are young startups, and we have two examples from that space. So we will look forward to discussing a lot more. To introduce to us. Sorry, just sorting out some technical. Please welcome our panelists for our second panel. Basigo is a young e-mobility startup in Kenya. Please welcome its founder and CEO, Jeet Bhattacharya. Ed Weber's team oversees several key projects, including World Bank's Global Facility to Decarbonize Transport, or GFDT, and we look forward to discussing that. And right next to me is Dr. Sudhir Mehta. His Pinnacle Industries is an automotive parts producer, and he's also launched a car which specializes in electric vehicles. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being over here. Jeet, I want to begin with you. In our previous panels, we spoke about different business models and how low and middle income countries are trying to figure out that balance of how to make sure that they're investing in EVs while also making them commercially viable. Basigo has an interesting business model. Could you talk to us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me here. So First, I think it's important to remember we're at the very beginning of the e-mobility journey in a market like Africa, but the opportunity is incredible. One of the main differences in Africa, especially when it comes to the bus market, is that it is primarily informal and privately owned. We have 1 million privately owned diesel buses providing public transport services across cities and rural areas in sub-Saharan Africa. And that's actually an opportunity. That means it's a fast-moving market, and that if you can make an economic business case, these private owners are ready to go through and transition, and that's exactly where we find ourselves right now when it comes to e-mobility and the competitiveness with the existing diesel buses. What we find is that across sub-Saharan Africa, especially in the last 12 months, diesel prices have risen astronomically, mainly through the removal of subsidies. This has made diesel bus operations almost untenable. Meanwhile, in East Africa, we have this remarkable resource. We have some of the cleanest electricity in the world. In Kenya right now, over 90% of the electricity feeding the grid is already renewable. That means if we replace just one of the 20,000 privately owned diesel buses in the city of Nairobi, it immediately mitigates 50 tons of CO2 per year. That's greater marginal impact on CO2 emissions than anywhere else. Not just that, like we've heard in the previous panel, the electric bus is more competitive over its life. The capex cost is still more expensive, but over its life, it's actually more affordable for this private bus owner. So the business model that we have created is basically meant to address that exact opportunity. Let's bring that upfront cost down. How do we do it? We call it our pay-as-you-drive lease. Through this pay-as-you-drive lease, operators are able to pay a very low upfront cost, less than they pay for a diesel bus. Then they pay us every single day based on the kilometers that they drive. They're still making significant savings compared to what they're paying for diesel fuel and maintenance. And in doing so, we basically make the cash flows not just match, but actually improve them on a daily basis for these operators. The moment you do that, you get what we are seeing right now in Nairobi. We have 350 deposits in just the last 3 months from private bus owners who want to switch to electric, who are frustrated there are not more electric buses available right now for us to deliver. We're talking about the opportunity to rapidly transition this market.
Okay, thank you. So there, you transitioned in some ways from a conventional business producing automotive parts, and now you have ECA. Since so many people who might be joining us are in conventional automotive industry, what advice would you have in terms of, just from your experience?
So first of all, thank you to World Bank and IFC for inviting me. Let me start by saying that this is probably the single biggest manufacturing opportunity of this century. Just to set the context, I come from India, and we are at kind of the cusp of this revolution. 45% of manufacturing in India is the auto industry. And if you see the impact of a shift of about 30% or 40% towards electric or alternative fuel vehicles, you're talking about a shift of 20% of the manufacturing industry of the country. Now, what's happening in India will happen in Africa, will happen in Brazil, will happen everywhere, almost in all what I call value markets. So to set the context, this is a huge opportunity. Secondly, this is an opportunity where there is an opportunity to bring great sustainable change. If we can make electric transport profitable, then, and Jeet already spoke about this, you're doing two things. You're bringing electric mobility into almost every country in the world, number one. Number two, you're making it profitable. Number three, you're creating millions of entrepreneurs. I think this is the very important aspect of this, many of whom will be women. So to that extent, every bus that operates creates 5 to 7 jobs. Every last mile delivery vehicle creates even more jobs. So the impact of this at scale is something that I think we're just starting to understand. And probably in terms of environment mitigation, this will be one of the forces that pushes in the coming decade.
So what did you learn while running a conventional vehicle business that you are now sort of bringing to your EV venture, ECA?
So 3 lessons. One lesson is an electric vehicle is as much software as its hardware. Typically, those from the auto industry are used to mechanical parts. The beauty of electric vehicle is the ability to collect data. And this is something which can have a huge impact on basic things like improving range, decreasing the running cost of the vehicle, safety, all of these parameters. The other is, I have a firm belief that we need to do what I call democratizing EVs, which means EVs must actually be produced in every country. Earlier, the automotive industry has been one which has been of scale. So you typically had 1 or 2 countries producing. Even today, 96% of electric buses are produced in one country. This needs to change.
Which country is that?
Well, take a guess. Of course, it's China. But this needs to change. I think every country in Africa, every country in Latin America needs to produce electric buses. The other panel gave an example of Brazil.
Yes.
There's 4 manufacturers. I think Jeet was speaking about Africa. This is possible because electric vehicles is no longer about producing at scale. You can produce in that particular country, get components from the large component manufacturers which exist, but produce locally to that market, because every market has nuances. Somebody needs a low floor bus, somebody needs a high floor, somebody needs more space for the specially abled, somebody has school buses, somebody needs school transport. All of these things can only be done if these are locally produced. So we actually have a model where we want to produce at scale in that particular country at a cost of less than 5 million, where you can set up a manufacturing facility, produce something, and the total cost of ownership, which again Jeet mentioned, is actually going to be lower than the cost of running a conventional diesel bus.
Okay, so different models and different transport systems for different countries. That brings me to you, Ed. Could you talk to us about the GFTT initiative, for which you're one of the largest funders? What's working on ground?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. We were absolutely delighted to work with the World Bank to help launch the GFTT at COP26. And we have been working really closely, I think, over the last few years to try to put this really essential new instrument on a pedestal as an exemplar of where the world needs to go in this space. Maybe before I answer your question, I just want to take a brief step back as to why we have been putting so much emphasis on the electrification of road transport in the global south over the last couple of years. Currently, 85% of all the light-duty vehicles that are sold, that are electric vehicles, are currently sold in the 6 largest markets. Just 3% are in emerging markets and developing economies. Currently, my understanding from the IEA's recent figures, if you fast forward to 2050, of the billion new vehicles that are expected to be on the market, 95% of those will be in emerging markets and developing economies. So that is a huge challenge. And it's also a huge opportunity, huge leapfrogging opportunity, and a huge economic opportunity, as we heard from the colleagues around the panel here. But we have these pretty fundamental financing risks. We've had a huge amount of consistent theme here about the high capex, low opex. We've the same thing in the renewable energy sector historically. So how do we overcome that? And I think, when we look at what has been essential to create the conditions for driving down the costs at real scale in renewables, a number of things come to mind. You need really strong, robust policy enabling environment. You need to have a pipeline of bankable projects. You need to have concessional finance to de-risk those projects in the first place, and you need to have private capital willing to invest. I think it's fair to say there's no shortage of private capital willing to invest in this space. Those other areas are really, really key, and I think this is where GFTT comes in. We've seen there's a sister fund in the energy sector called ESMAP, which is also housed by the World Bank, which we're big fans of. And that's been absolutely critical for providing kind of early stage technical assistance and project preparation support for countries who are just entering down this journey. And GFTT, I think, is the potential to be the centerpiece of the equivalent story here in the electric mobility case globally. That's what our ambition would be. It's obviously early days. I think there are 7 projects now currently under construction, one of which is fully complete. Others we're looking forward to seeing the results. But I think there's some really exciting things coming through the pipeline. So when you look at the Lima project, which I think was a relatively small targeted amount of technical assistance funding that has led to, I think, $500 million worth of subsequent projects coming through the system for a smart urban integrated transport planning and traffic management system. Now that's incredibly valuable, targeted climate finance that is then leading to a whole pipeline that's transformational in its effort. Another one I wanted to highlight was, which I know is still being fully rolled out, is in sub-Saharan Africa, where there's a regional project there, which is a really exciting way of really flexing the way the GFTT can work to suit the particular political economy on the ground. And I think there's
Could
some
you
really
elaborate
exciting
on
things.
that? Which country are we talking about?
It's sub-Saharan African, so I forget all the number of countries that are involved, but it's a multi-country approach. I think, from my understanding, is it's being hugely well received by those countries and has high ambitions to be able to cover 2- and 3-wheelers, e-buses, e-freight, lots of cross-border potential there, and potentially also looking at aggregated demand frameworks as well, which are incredibly valuable for driving down the costs and scaling the deployment of these new technologies. So we see this as being really critical, and I hope that we look to the future that our partnership with the World Bank and other donors can help to scale this and ensure that the parallel work that we do from a wider climate finance point of view can also dovetail neatly with this critical mechanism.
Thank you, Ed. I want to talk a little bit about the larger socioeconomic impact of e-mobility and sort of the conscious effort that goes into it. We talked about employment, and development is usually a pretty well-known byproduct. But Jeet, could you talk to us about your ground report? Like, what do what do operators and passengers sort of tell you about the larger benefits of what you're doing?
Well, I think I'm so glad you asked that question, because the transformative potential of what we are talking about here cannot be underestimated. And I'll actually share a story, one of the inspirations for why we started Basigo. It was actually in April of 2020, and we saw similar stories in India and other parts of the world. In April of 2020, we all know what was happening. It was the beginning of the COVID pandemic. And in the city of Nairobi, the government, for a period of 3 days, stopped all the diesel buses from operating. And almost overnight, the air completely cleared, and we were able to see Mount Kenya, 350 kilometers away, crystal clear. You talk to most Kenyans, they will say there was the first time they've seen it like that in almost 30 years. It was breathtaking. We saw the same thing in New Delhi. We saw it in Mumbai, right? It was one of the strange benefits of COVID, the glimpse it gave us. When we talk about electric vehicles, when we talk about electrification of public transport, the number of benefits beyond the climate impact, and the climate impact is the most important, but the number of co-benefits are extraordinary. We're talking about these rapidly growing megacities, cleaning the air, creating a sustainable future, improving health outcomes. In Kenya right now, the greatest co-benefit is the reduction of fuel imports. Right now, the import of transport fuel is the greatest use of foreign currency reserves in most African countries. It is a direct threat to currency stability and economic growth. Every liter of fuel that we do not import supports economic growth right now in the country. Third, we're talking about creating green manufacturing jobs in the exact way that my colleague shared. But then most importantly, the one that we're most proud of, I think there's often this common belief in the Global South that renewable energy technologies, the sustainable transformation, that it's too expensive for the Global South. Here, what we're talking about is bringing clean, modern, connected public transport to cities across Africa. And not just that, the climate impact of doing this is actually greater than in many other cities in the world. That's an opportunity that cannot be denied.
Okay, great. Sudhir, I want to talk to you about scaling production. You're making EVs, but also you are what is called an original equipment manufacturer, OEM. Took me a while to learn that. But could you tell me about the challenges when it comes to scaling these?
Yeah, so while we are an OEM, we want hundreds of others to become OEMs, and let me explain why. And I think Jeet kind of set the context to this. India today has 1.5 million buses. That's about 1.4 per every 1,000 people. Countries like South Africa have about 6. So the need for buses today is probably not once or twice, it's 10 or 100 times the number of buses which are there today. We all know the obvious reasons for that. The only way you're going to get a transformation of that scale is if you can bring the capital cost down, also the running cost down. This is already starting to happen now. What will happen in the case of OEMs was that earlier you produced in a particular location, you had high logistics costs, etc. In the future, I see a vision where electric last mile delivery vehicles, vehicles for garbage, vehicles for specific applications will be produced in that particular country. Each country will have their own manufacturing ecosystem. Of course, certain things like battery cells, etc., will come from particular countries which have that mineral capacity. You will then start to see a local industry which grows, and this industry will create jobs. This is a $1 trillion opportunity. This is not a $1 billion opportunity. And again, we have the World Bank and IFC here, so I want to take this opportunity to request them that they have to look at this as now a business of scale, because when the pie grows, that is the only way you're going to be able to bring this down. We have green capital coming in, and since we are at COP, the impact that this can have in the next 2 decades is absolutely phenomenal. There is a way to clean up the cities. She just gave that example. Actually the amounts involved are not so big. You're talking about 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 buses in the overall budget. We've spent a lot more on the metro systems. India actually, again, an example of India, we have 200 million people daily who do a last mile commute, which can move to buses. Now, if you do this, you're going to create impact and change at a scale which really will have a transformational impact. So I'm very excited. I think this is the opportunity for all of us to come together and bring this meaningful change. At the same time, do it profitably, because that's the only way that eventually this can be sustained.
Ed, you've heard the pitch from the two gentlemen on your left and your right. So could you talk to us a bit about how governments like you and organizations like yours can sort of fulfill their quote-unquote demands?
Good question. So one of the things that we are doing is putting a big emphasis on international collaboration to try to scale some of these efforts and to coordinate them more effectively. We have set up also at COP26 a framework for this kind of collaborative effort called the Breakthrough Agenda. The road transport breakthrough is aiming to try to make electric mobility in the road transport sector the most economic option for all countries everywhere by the end of this decade. And the way that works is it tries to identify some of those critical enablers internationally that we can help collectively deliver in a quite a tight time frame and mobilize countries behind those efforts. So I'm quite pleased to say yesterday, underneath that effort, we actually launched the first global zero-emission vehicle roadmap, a transition roadmap, which brings together, I think, something like 60 different international assistance providers. It has consulted with 50 different governments around the world to articulate both what is currently going on and also where we need to plug those gaps in the international assistance offer. So it's a really attempt to try to look at the system transition, a holistic international offering that can help ensure that these excellent ideas, these excellent kind of propositions have the support they need at every different stage of the process. GFDT is absolutely the heart of that for sure. And we're seeing some really interesting partnerships develop underneath it. For example, the Collective for Clean Transport for Finance, which is a more private sector-led effort, is absolutely partnering very closely with GFDT. We look forward to seeing some really scalable models there. I think, for example, for me, I find the aggregated e-bus demand mechanisms a really powerful, very, very easily and quickly deployable tool that can get to some of the scale and start to bring down some of those costs, for example. So this will be an annual process that we'll be looking to update each year, each COP, hold ourselves to account to try to make sure we're doing our part, and then looking consistently at, not duplicating what's working well, but plugging and reinforcing the gaps and ensuring we're amplifying and mobilizing more resources behind those efforts that are really, really effective. I'm pretty sure GFDT will be a central part of that story consistently over the coming years. So yeah, I can go on at length about this. In fact, I have the publication with me if you would like to read it or come and talk to us afterwards. But it's a really exciting time, and I do get the sense that the architecture, the international architecture, is starting to organize itself in a way that has been. We are learning the lessons, I think, perhaps from the power sector where they didn't do this earlier, and are probably slightly regretting it. And we're trying to get our arms around this now, and ultimately that will stand everyone in a better place, and we can respond at greater speed and scale to the opportunities coming down the line.
Thank you for that, though I have a suspicion that the gentlemen were hoping you'll pull out a checkbook. But since we don't have...
Actually, if I might, I can point to...
Wire transfer also works.
Maybe just to point out one other piece of infrastructure. I mean, the gentlemen were talking a lot about scale, and I think that absolutely this is really key. So I mentioned the demand aggregation instruments as one example of that. There is another program that is, again, hosted by the World Bank. World Bank is everywhere, it seems, these days. It's a climate investment fund cities program. It hasn't been launched yet, but is getting close to being launched. Now, that is explicitly designed to provide highly concessional finance at large scale to mobilize 10, 11, 12x in co-financing. Hopefully, with any luck, by COP29, we'll have that launched. And I hope, gentlemen, you should definitely keep your eyes open for that, because it would be a really powerful vehicle for taking things that are seeded by the targeted investments from GFTT, piloted in these different countries, and then can really go to a huge scale in the years ahead. And we are putting our checkbook out for that one.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you for that tip. Jeet, I do want to talk to you about financial instruments. We spoke about scaling. So as a startup that basically got on the road at one of the worst economic times in a recent history, what are the instruments that you are looking at? Because there's so much conversation about climate financing here at COP. Where are you seeing sort of green lights?
You said the most important thing was we're a startup. And actually, when you look at the e-mobility sector right now in Africa, it is predominantly made up of startups working in the 2- and 3-wheel sector, working in the bus sector the way that we are. And that's important. So how are startups typically funded? We go and raise venture capital and we raise private equity. We've raised about $11 million of venture capital funding so far. With that, we've deployed 19 electric buses, which we're very proud to say have now hit 1 million kilometers of operation. In Nairobi, we've launched 2 buses in Rwanda. It's great. Venture capital is fantastic. It's risk tolerant. It's there to go through and prove models. But we're also working in an emerging market, and that means that we have certain needs and we have certain challenges. We are competing against an industry that has been in place for 100 years. They're operating at thousands of units of scale, and as startup companies, we're trying to compete against them at scale of less than 10. We need to bridge to some level of scale. This is common across all e-mobility companies in Africa. We saw the same thing in India, and India, I believe, has now crossed that Rubicon, and the industry is now operating at a high degree of scale. Africa, we are not there yet. We need the DFIs in particular, and that's why we're so proud to be in close partnership with IFC. This week, we're really excited. We announced a $5 million debt facility from British International Investment. Facilities like this are critical. That will allow us to deploy 100 electric buses in Nairobi and help us start to bridge to scale. So that is one thing that we very clearly need, is that bridge to be able to get there. The second thing that we need, I think that you're going to hear commonly in the industry as e-mobility begins to take off, is we need the local banks. We need the local African banks. They are the ones who traditionally finance the combustion engine vehicles in the continent. We can't leave them behind. This can't all be DFI finance. So we're going to need to find mechanisms to get them comfortable with the new technology risk, with the fact that they're working with startups, all of this. And this is where another place where the DFIs and the likes of IFC, DFC, World Bank can come in and hopefully play a role is through the financial institutions groups.
Those conversations, like when you go to one of the public banks and you speak to them, what is the challenge you're facing there?
The main challenge is risk aversion. So historically, African banks tend to be quite risk averse. And that's not universal. It definitely varies market to market. But here, what are we talking about? We're talking about a brand new technology. Well, it looks incredibly economically attractive. And many of these local banks also have sustainability initiatives, climate targets. It's the newness, it's the risk, it's the fact that even a company as advanced as ours, our buses have only been running for 2 years. And here, we're projecting to them an 8-year financing model. They say, how do I know that this technology is still going to be working at year 6, at year 7, that you're still going to be able to pay that loan? No, I'm sorry, I need to wait a few more years. But the problem is in the climate movement, we don't have a few more years. It has to start moving now, and we need to get the local banks involved. We need to get them comfortable.
Thank you. Sudhir, you've spoken a lot about the pie growing and how that's really important for your company and for the industry. But when countries like India get big funding from big organizations, some funders are here, I won't take names, but you know who you are. How do companies like yours compete?
The funding will come in when scale comes, which is starting to happen. For a funding organization, what's most important is to see that they get their money back. And let me give you 2 or 3 statistics which show why it's now profitable. If you take a cab in Europe, you'll pay maybe $3 or $4 per kilometer. Now, the cost of running a bus in India, which means you can get a bus which includes 12-year maintenance, which includes the people, the electricity, is less than $1. It's maybe about 70 euro cents, which means to transport 70 people, the cost of doing that is half the cost of one cab. So you're talking 2%, which means transportation through buses has now become something which is very viable. What you charge is a function of what the state transport wants to charge or the entity wants to charge. People will be willing to pay for this safe, efficient and air-conditioned way to travel from point A to point B. When you start to aggregate this, you will start to see the multinational, multilateral financial institutions which will come in. Earlier it was the smaller banks, and I think as Jeet mentioned, the concern always was what is the battery life, will it last? Fortunately, all parameters are now positive. By all indicators, depending on who you believe, the cost of batteries will be down by about 50% in the next 5 years. Let's assume it's even half that. That means that the only replacement item in an electric bus, which is essentially the battery, which is the fuel that runs it, is going to be half. Can you say that about fossil fuels? The answer is no. Fossil fuels are always going up. So to that extent, electric mobility over a period of time, the costs are likely to come down, which is a great financing case. The challenge here is to get them to understand that this is something which can be bridged, and how do you connect it to the fare collection systems, etc. So there's a just and equitable way where somebody who's financing it gets paid first, and then eventually, like a waterfall mechanism, the other people get paid later. But I think this will happen. It's a question of time. And as Jeet mentioned, it is now, because every minute, every second, every hour that we lose is something that we could have taken care of the environment only for a few $1 billion, which I think is funds which are available.
But you're talking mostly about vehicles as they are. What about infrastructure? Because for all of what you're talking about to work, you need to have something as basic as charging stations. So what about that front?
So this is always a chicken and egg argument. Fortunately, charging also is spreading very fast. There are many companies which are doing this at scale, and continuously the cost of this is coming down. So actually, I'll add one more element to this, which is the holy grail. And the holy grail actually is to be able to use solar power. Today, for instance, for a country like India, we still pay 10 to 12 rupees, let's say about 15, 20 euro cents. In Africa, yesterday we were discussing, they pay about 6 euro cents for power. If you can get solar energy combined where you have some kind of a green metering system which runs electric vehicles, then you've got not parity, you're going to knock it out of the ground. You're going to actually, nobody should be using a diesel vehicle for a bus. It makes no commercial sense. And I think this will start to happen because solar is already something which is a very mature industry. There is a lot of money which has come into it. Charging infrastructure will happen. And this is also where I think we need a confluence of companies. This cannot be done by the OEMs, cannot be done by the operating companies. We need a whole new category of companies to come into this market which have experience in doing infrastructure projects. We are not infrastructure guys. We know how to make a vehicle, we know how to service it. We need infrastructure companies to come in at scale. And this is when I think you will see an explosion of electric vehicles.
One thing that you also need is political will and regulatory framework. So I do want to spend some time talking about that. Ed, could you talk about the sort of, because you work in projects across different countries, so in your experience, what are the challenges, the regulatory challenges that you often meet with?
So we can write a thesis on this one.
Well, you have about 3 minutes.
Perfect, great. I mean, it's actually not that dissimilar. Some of the same themes were coming out earlier. This is first of a kind stuff. So there isn't a historical memory within administrations around how to do this sort of material. There simply often isn't the capacity to be able to do it quickly. And so we're often asking governments to do something for the first time very, very fast and then do it at scale. And that's a pretty huge challenge. I think, though, that there are now, I mean, also I would also add that, you know, the developed world is also only recently kind of cracking this. I think the UK is one of the only countries so far that has actually put forward we call it a ZEV mandate, which is a kind of very, very firm regulatory requirement to scale the production of electric vehicles to achieve our own electric vehicle goals. So it's not as though there is also a vast chasm of decadal experience within the developed world either. So we have this challenge. We have to get very, very good at doing this in our own countries, and at the same time make sure we are sharing all the lessons and learning that we have as quickly as possible and investing in the capacities and capabilities of the emerging markets, developing economies. I think that also then points, to my mind, to the importance of the collaborative efforts to ensure we do this in the most efficient and effective way. I mentioned GFTT already as being one of those instruments. Is really, really key. We also have a number of other of our own instruments. I'm sure other countries do too. For example, I think we heard earlier on today the Bogota example, which was benefited from our own bilateral technical assistance program called UK Pact. So we need to make sure that instrument is lined up firmly alongside other instruments. There are other follow-on programs that could be valuable as potential recipients of GFTT-supported project preparation elements. So the Mitigation Action Facility, for example, is a UK-German-led piece. So we need to kind of try and make sure all these instruments are being really well connected together, and we aren't wasting time setting up brand new pieces that ultimately aren't necessarily valuable. I think the other piece I would say is that as governments ourselves, we need to do more to build the plurilateral and the bilateral partnerships that are going to help in quite an intensive way with key markets who really want to go further and faster. For example, we were very pleased with our American colleagues to establish the first zero-emission vehicle partnership with India at COP27. I think that's been a really interesting learning experience for all of us about how we can do both government-to-government discussions, but also with the private sector, both on the ground and with international investors. And that's a model I think we'd like to be able to scale to other places. So that's a really kind of quite intensive, holistic attempt to try to use our own domestic experiences, but also bring in our multilateral partners and private investors together to be able to scale those transitions in practice. So I think those are some of the kind of key opportunities I see, but everyone needs to do a lot more, but we also have to do it in a really smart, strategic and joined up way in order to be able to get the maximum impact we can.
Of course, you mentioned learning curves. So if I could just catch on to that and ask you, what has been the biggest learning from that experience?
I think that it's really, really critical that we are able to simplify the offer and make it extremely accessible and responsive to the country's needs. I hate to say it, but we are collectively, partly from goodwill, but collectively the developed world has created a rather complicated international climate finance architecture out there. Mm-hmm. And you need several PhDs to be able to actually understand what is available and how to bring it all together in a sensible way. So I think, the insight biggest insight I would draw from our experience of talking to India in particular is we need to make that story much, much simpler. We need to put the country at the center of the story and put our efforts into convening and ensuring that all those different instruments are being used in the most kind of holistic, integrated way. If we do that, I think we can actually achieve the sort of system transition that is required to do this at speed and scale.
Thank you. Jeet, we know we've spoken a lot about Basigo in terms of Kenya, but you're also expanding regionally. So when you hop from one country to the other, what are the sort of regulatory mismatches? I mean, how much time and effort goes into just tailoring your business model and your product to fit that sort of regulation, the uniqueness of every country?
Well, I think this is what's actually remarkable about Africa, is that it's predominantly a private sector market. Now, every single market, there's a different degree of government regulation that is there. It's still public transport. There's always some regulation. But predominantly in sub-Saharan Africa, it is private sector driven. And that's what's amazing about this opportunity. We're talking about something that's commercially bankable, that is private sector led, where ultimately what is the goal? We really take our inspiration from the solar industry and the way in which we've seen the commercial and industrial solar industry scale pretty much globally in the last 10 years. If we're able to demonstrate this pay-as-you-drive financing model, what we want to do is ultimately unlock hundreds of millions of dollars of private sector commercial climate finance in order to be able to drive this transition. But we need the DFI support in the early years in order to build those proof points and do it. That's what's amazing. So what we really look for in every single new market is, number one, what's the climate impact? What is the renewable energy percentage? Number two is, what is the macroeconomic context in which public transport is operating? Fuel prices, electricity costs, the nature of how public transport's working, the incumbent diesel vehicles against which we're competing. That's really what matters. And then, do we have an enabling ecosystem? And this is where I want to give the credit to governments like Rwanda. The government of Rwanda has been very forward-leading in terms of policy to promote the adoption of all forms of electric mobility, from two wheels to passenger cars, all the way to electric buses. And I hope that we can see enabling ecosystems like that in more African countries to help accelerate this transition.
So could you specify what kind of incentives are there? Because, you know, that's something that people could take to their governments.
The most important thing that matters, I don't think we talk about this enough, is a level playing field. It's not even subsidies, it's a level playing field. We have to remember, we still live in a global economy where typically fuel is subsidized, where oftentimes there are special incentives around, despite being at the largest climate conference every year, we're still living in a world where there's typically preferential benefits for combustion engines, fossil fuels. One of the greatest things we've seen in Kenya in the last year is that the Kenyan government has now created a level playing field in terms of tax, in terms of special benefits. There's really there's now a VAT exemption for EVs, which is great. It helps us get through some of these early years. But even in the out years, we expect that should go away, and we should be operating on a level playing field. If we can do that in the global south in key markets like two-wheelers, three-wheelers, and public transport, we can compete head-to-head right now.
Great. Ed, just a minute or two on this. What is your government doing to incentivize private players? Or what do you think it can do?
A market, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, there is a mixture of sticks and carrots, I would say. The big driver is the ZEV mandate regulation, which I mentioned before. That is a legal requirement on manufacturers to produce a growing portion of their fleet that is pure zero-emission vehicles. And that will be the thing that guarantees that we get to where we need to be. But that is definitely complemented by a range of both historical and current incentives, some which are consumer-facing, some of which are very specifically aimed at scaling the rollout of grid infrastructure, which I agree is a kind of that is probably the biggest concern. The consumer concern is, can you be confident that you'll be able to access a sufficiently robust and rapid charger when you need to? And I think that's probably one of the key areas where the government's focusing on right now. We will also see in the coming years new regulations for other segments, medium and heavy duty coming through in 24 and 25. So yeah, that combination of regulatory requirements and then the incentives that help to kickstart the infrastructure investments and also the consumer market at scale.
Thank you. And so, what do you wish the government would help you out with, and in terms of regulations, but also sort of incentives?
So actually, this is one of the areas where I would say the government has done a lot, especially for us in India. What they have done is, one, there is a very clear commitment, right, coming from the Prime Minister's level of the shift to electric mobility. This is something which has been made very clear. And you can see the results. This year, India will deploy more electric buses than all of Europe. At some point, I also want to challenge the developed world here. I think emerging markets are actually moving to electric mobility much, much faster. The Europe e-bus market has been 4,000 buses plus minus 500 for the last 10 years and is growing at less than 5%. We will grow at upwards of a few 100% every year and will deploy 100,000 buses. So this is, so developing countries are actually taking the lead here, and it's very clear. I will go out on a limb and say that by the year 2030, outside of China, India will be the largest electric mobility market in the world. We will deploy 100,000 buses in India. Hopefully Africa will do the same, Latin America will do the same. Actually, I hope markets like America and Europe catch up, because I think they're kind of napping at the moment. For some reason, electric mobility is not moving at the pace at which it needs to move. And my sense is actually products from developing markets will eventually see their way to these markets, because when this size and scale comes, you're going to see that even the developed markets will have a demand for such products which come in. And this is one area where there's a level playing field. Nobody has a lead anymore. It used to be that when you had diesel vehicles, if you were an engine producer, you needed 100 years of history. You don't need that. So I would strongly encourage local manufacturers in every country to start manufacturing electric vehicles. If somebody tells you it can't be done, it's not right. It can be done.
Okay. Yes, of course.
In addition to what Sudhir is saying, is there's not just this competition where the developing countries are really leading, but there's another opportunity here, which we have to remember in markets like India, Africa, China, the portion of the global population that we represent. And in the development that's to come in the next 10 years, especially in markets like Africa, if we follow the path of my home country of the United States and everybody transitions to a passenger car, doesn't matter if all those cars are electric. And right now, developing countries, they seem to have this fascination really with electric cars. But if we can create modern, electric, sustainable public transport that prevents people from getting into a passenger car and actually puts them into public transport, that's the greatest climate impact that we can have, greater than even the transition to electric.
And of course, the larger socioeconomic impacts of that in terms of jobs and safety and all of that. Finally, we're almost running out of time. In a few words or less, your top priority in terms of getting funding, in scaling, just from a business perspective. Sudhir, do you want to begin?
Top priority is to make us as a company. Our top priority is to be one of the global volume leaders in commercial electric vehicles. As a country, it is to bring this change which makes electric mobility sustainable and profitable and creates impact at scale.
Okay, and how, any top way of achieving that, Sudhir?
I think we'll get there because the confluence of factors is now there. Of course, whether we do it or somebody else does it is based on the appropriate technology we bring in, the cost that we do it. But that threshold is now crossed. I don't think anybody can stop it because electric mobility makes commercial sense. The total cost of ownership of an electric vehicle is now better than a conventional vehicle. There is nothing else which can beat that because the customer here is very informed. They understand this and the shift will happen. Whether it happens within 1 year or 2 years or 5 years is a question of climate finance coming in. I think that's the single most important factor.
Speaking of climate finance, Ed, your top priority?
So my top priority would be, I would like to see at the next COP, and certainly by COP30, the road transport transition being totally mainstreamed within the industrial climate finance architecture. We were having a very brief conversation earlier on and just saying the contrast between power projects versus road transport projects and the ability to get the finance you need is stark. Now that is slowly changing. I hope that we can see the exponential change in that narrative in the same way we're seeing the exponential change in the rollout of EVs globally at the moment. It's going to be critical, and I think I really, something you mentioned about the opportunity for the developing world to go faster than the developed world, I think is true. The fact that we're not having to deal with a series of incumbency challenges that I think that the developed world has to deal with, and the leapfrogging opportunities. I mean, you're talking about a complete transformation in both mobility in general and entirely being electrically based. It's really very, very exciting, and I want to see my colleagues who are sitting around the climate finance table seeing that opportunity too. So I look forward to engaging with them and with the World Bank and trying to make that happen.
Thank you. Anjeet, finally to you. We want to end on a positive note.
Our focus right now is to get 1,000 electric buses deployed in East Africa in the next 3 years. We're a startup company, so we have a short-term horizon. But ultimately, I think Sudhir said it very well. This transition now, it's starting to feel inevitable. I feel like what we've done as Basigo in East Africa is we've really built the crack in the dam. Now, for us, our job is to deliver. We've set expectations here when it comes to especially the bus operators, the public. Now our job is to deliver, and we're looking forward to partnering with the World Bank Group to help make this transition happen.
All the best for that. Thank you so much to all three of you and our previous speakers for this conversation. As we know, decarbonization is a tough journey. It's a long
fantastic,
journey,
yeah.
but it was really
Next
great
time
to
you're
listen to
anytime.
all the potential and challenges and, of course, the promises. Thank you. A recording of this will be available online on the World Bank website. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sounds
Yeah.
super exciting.
Oh, it's...